Hi everyone and welcome to my Mackey Boxes presentation. My name is Roberto Salazar. So let us begin. So for my first Mackey box, I decided to reflect on my own language use at the age of 6. So at age 6, my parents had barely immigrated from Mexico into the United States. We began living in El Segundo Barrio of El Paso, Texas, which is considered the ghetto part of the city. There will be gang activities, robberies, and other criminal activities throughout a regular day. There were many different languages in my home, in my school, and my community, as you can see in the picture that I'm showing right now. So first of all, in my home, the only language that I used was Spanish. Both of my parents did not know any English, so in order to communicate with them, I had to use Spanish. Second, so I attended Alamo Elementary School at El Paso, Texas. So this school had a bilingual program, but the program was not very well structured. I was initially placed in an ESL, so as an English as a second language class, where I was learning English. Later on in the semester, the class got removed from the school and I was placed in an English only classroom. So most of my language usage in school was English, which is the 80% that you see there. But I did speak Spanish with my friends, which is the 20% that is there. Third, in my community was considered a bilingual community since we were very close to the border. I remember we were able to visit Juarez whenever we wanted to because it was just that close to our house. The specific neighborhood that I lived in was completely bilingual, so whenever I would go to play outside, I would meet children that spoke both English and Spanish. Whenever my parents would take me to the store, there were people who spoke Spanish also. Although there were some occasions where I did go to, different places and I only met English speaking persons. So that only happened when I went, I guess, to what's considered big stores. But that is why my area and community is 60% English and 40% Spanish. Then for my fifth one was so my nation is also going to be 100% in English. That's because in the state of Texas, that's just how it is. And for international, I do have as Spanish only or 100% in Spanish because every week my family and I would visit my aunts and uncles living in Juarez. I would only speak Spanish to all of my cousins because that was the common language that we all knew. Also, if I went to any store, we would only speak Spanish. So that is my own language used at age 6. Let's continue. So for my second box, I decided to do my father's language usage at age 6. And at age 6, my father was living in Torreon, Coahuila, which is in Mexico. My father grew up with his grandparents on a farm. So, according to my dad, his grandfather knew two languages but only spoke Spanish to him. So, the only language he was ever exposed to was Spanish. My father's grandmother died when he was very young, so he did not remember a lot about her. In his home, the only language spoken was Spanish. Now, regarding school, my father never went to a formal school, so again, his only exposure was Spanish from his grandfather. Regarding his community, my father was not allowed to leave the farm, so again, his only exposure was Spanish. And in his nation, the language that was spoken was Spanish. Also, my father did not have any exposure to like television or to radios or to stuff like that. So again, his only pure exposure is always just Spanish. So overall, my father had a very peculiar childhood, I would say. He lived on a farm and did not receive any formal school until he was about 10 years old. Also, he never met his parents until he was about 18 years old and married my mother when he was 15 years old. So, yeah, it's a big background. For my third Mackie box, I decided to do a child in my family, which in this case is gonna be Jaylani at age 6. So Jaylani is my niece and she is currently living with her mother and grandparents in Mesquite, New Mexico. There were many differences that we can see in her specific language. So first, let's talk about her home. The language spoken in her house are 70% Spanish and 30% English. Jaylani's mother is bilingual, but her grandparents are monolingual and only speak Spanish. Thus, Jaylani is exposed to both languages, but Spanish is most prevalent. Second, Jaylani is attending Vado Elementary School, where her class is English only. Also, her friends at this school prefer to speak English. So that is why in the school we can see that 100%. So third, in the community, Mezquite is considered a bilingual community since the dominant language in the area is Spanish compared to to English, which is just 20%. In most cases, Jainali will be exposed to the Spanish language. So this includes like in a church or while playing outside or at parks or even in stores. The English language is only present at specific stores throughout Mezquite. And when I'm talking about specific stores, I'm talking about the Dollar General that's at Mezquite. Fourth, the nation is English only, which is the 100%, because that's the dominant language in the United States. And fifth, her international is 100%. Every year, Jaylani's family goes to Mexico to visit family. And in Mexico, the language used is Spanish. So overall, Jaylani at age 6 is very different from my both previous boxes. One thing to note is that Jaylani prefers to speak English over Spanish. In most cases, she speaks English and only speaks Spanish when necessary. Also, her mother speaks to Jaylani using a combination of both English and Spanish, which could be considered Spanglish. Then for my final Mackey box, I decided to do my girlfriend's language use at age 6. At age 6, Alvina was also living in Mesquite, New Mexico with her mother. So there were many different, again, language uses in this particular community when Alvina was age 6. First, in her home, the language used was Spanish. Alvina's mother is a monolingual and only speaks Spanish. Thus, Alvina was exposed to only the Spanish language. Second, Alvina attended Mesquite Elementary School, where her class was Spanish only. Also, her friends at the school preferred to speak Spanish. So then third, in the community, used to be considered a Spanish community, since the dominant language in that area is Spanish with 100%. It has shifted throughout the years. So like you saw in Jaylani's box, now it's more of an 80-20, but this time it's actually when it was before, it's actually 100%. So in all the cases Alvina was exposed to, it's always Spanish. Then in the fourth, which is like the nation, everything is again 100%. And for her international, it is Spanish for 100% because every year Alvina's family would go to Mexico to visit family, and in Mexico the language is Spanish. Overall, Alvina's language at age 6 was very different from all of my boxes. Again, even though she was in the United States, she was in a Spanish-only classroom rather than a bilingual classroom. Also, her community was Spanish dominant and no other language was spoken. So considering that Mesquite, New Mexico is in the United States, this was very shocking. Also, something even more surprising is that her current dominant language is English rather than Spanish. So I always ask myself, when did this shift actually occur? And those, I'm going to be consider those in my comparison. So for this final part, I'm just going to compare and analyze the 4 boxes that I just mentioned. And here are the 4 boxes right here. So first, there were some factors that remained the same in some boxes. So for example, my father and my box had some similarities. We both had the home language at 100% at age 6. And for my girlfriend and niece, it was a bit different, only the international was the same at 100%. Second, all the boxes were different in specific ways. My father's was completely different because he was raised in Mexico at a farm, so he never really got exposed to other languages. Thus, everything in his box is 100% Spanish. Next, my Mackey box was very different because at age 6, my family was living in poverty. So we were in a bad community and the school was not so good. Thus, I was exposed to Spanish and English, but Spanish remained my dominant language. Next, for my girlfriend's box was also a bit different because she was in a community where Spanish was the dominant language and almost no other language was present, even though she was raised in the United States. Thus, most of her box was Spanish. And last, my niece's box was completely different because her parents know English and talk to her in both English and Spanish, and her community has shifted to a more English dominant community. Also, the school only provides a bilingual program to students who speak only Spanish. So third, let's talk about the school role, I guess, that has to take in all of this. So for my father, the school was not an option since he was never exposed to other settings. Then in my case, I was part of the bilingual classroom that was not very effective, but still pushed me to learn some English. For my girlfriend, she was never in a bilingual classroom until middle school, so she was taught Spanish for all her elementary years. And lastly, for my niece, the school is completely English and there is a limited bilingual program established, so she needs to learn English. Languages seem to be dwindling throughout the generations. I can clearly see this with my niece because my niece currently she's just 6 years old and we can see that English is going to be the most dominant language that she has. She currently speaks more English than Spanish and she even prefers it. So also, many bilingual communities have begun to shift towards an English-only community, and we can see this in the community of Mesquite because it used to be 100% English, and now it's shifted to a little bit less. It's slowly shifting towards an English-dominant community. So overall, thank you guys for listening. That would conclude my presentation.